Hey, this is Don from Padlock Technologies again with another video. This is going to go right after my should network engineers become software engineers video. If you haven't seen it, I'll put a card somewhere up here to point you back to that video. But this video is based on a question I got about, okay, you said we don't really need to be software engineers, right? But where should I start? There's so many languages. There's Ansible, Python, there's all kind of stuff, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the difference between Ansible syntax, Python syntax. Now, before I do this, I'm going to say this to the course creator community, right? People that are trying to teach technology. It is never the tech. It is always the teacher. What does that mean? That means the reason why a lot of people find this stuff so hard is because the people that are relaying the information are teaching the information are not teaching the information from the viewpoint of the person that's trying to ingest the information. If you create a beginner course, it should be a beginner course. It shouldn't be all this other stuff. And you need to tell the whole thing. Case in point, I'm using Mac now. I normally use Linux to do the network automation, but there's some issues with trying to get your environment set up with Mac, right? Like case in point, you can install Homebrew and then install Ansible. But then when you try to install Paramiko or NetMiko, it will install. But then when you try to actually run NetMiko, it says the module's missing. So there's something going on with the environment, right? In Linux, I don't have that problem whatsoever, right? And there's prerequisites that you need to set up before you can even do any of this stuff, right? Now, in Linux, it's a lot easier. You just install, Paramiko, NetMiko, Ansible. You get, VS Code or PyCharm, and you're pretty much ready to go, right? You're ready and set to go. The other issue with the teaching is not relating it to what a network engineer is actually going to do. Now, when I show you some of these things and I explain it to you, I'm going to explain it in a way that is digestible by network engineers. Again, I'm going to show you what a dictionary is. I'm going to show you what a list is, but I'm going to relate it to what you'll actually do with Cisco equipment or Juniper equipment or Ford or what, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do Cisco for this one, but I'm going to show you in the context of what a network engineer is going to do. One of the big problems I've seen, and I'll give you an example of a list. They'll show you, oh, this is a list. This is a data type list in Python. And then they'll show you stuff like apple, oranges, grapes. As a network engineer, I don't care about apple, oranges, and grapes. Show me how this works related to my job, right? And that's what I'm going to do in this when I show you. I'm using PyCharm on the Mac because the PyCharm works. Again, I told you about those little, environment setup issues that I was running into. But once I get to the actual pie charm here, you'll see what I'm talking about. So let's get to the pie charm and start breaking it down. So here is pie charm. Here is the code. Now this is Ansible. Now to set up Ansible here in PyCharm, you see the left window, that's basically my folder. I have an Ansible folder. I have an Ansible CFG file. This is, if you install Ansible a certain way, you may not have an Ansible CFG file. So I'm creating this and I'm going to show you what the variables are in there. Everything's in YAML. This JSON file was based on something that I did with this playbook here called getFacts JSON, which basically gets facts or gets information. That's what facts are. Get information about the device and it puts it in YAML or JSON format. That's all that really does. All right. And then you're going to run these basically using the Ansible playbook and then the playbook, which is this whatever.yaml. All right. Now, first thing you need to set up, let's look at the Ansible CFG. Now I'm in the folder. So Python or Ansible will run in the relative to what folder is it, right? So if this is where I told you in the last video where you got to know what an absolute path versus relative path is. Relative path is basically where you are, right? So if I'm in the Ansible folder and I run Ansible from there, I'm running it from the Ansible folder. The absolute path is if I wanted to go to another folder, I would have to go all the way back, maybe go to my home folder. And if it's in another folder, then I would give it where that YAML playbook is, I would give it that path. But we're going to run it within the Ansible folder here. So Ansible CFG, let's click on that real quick. And let's explain a couple things from the Ansible standpoint. Now, this is all Ansible. Python, you don't have to do any of this. Ansible CFG stuff, and I'll show you when I flip it to the Python stuff. So this is just saying these are my defaults. What are my defaults? Host key checking. I'm not going to check for any, keys or SSH keys or anything like that. That's why I set it to false. I'm saying my inventory file, which is right here, this inventory dot YML file, that's where it's located. If I didn't have that in there, I would have to, you can point it to another file. You just have to point it to where it is. Remember, relative path versus absolute path. This dot / means it's in the folder that I'm sitting in. And then gathering explicit, this is what gathering facts, unless I specifically ask to gather facts, it's not going to do gathering. Now, normally people will put gather facts equals false in here because you don't want to have, Ansible will try to gather information about the device that you're on, and it gets annoying. So this is what I'm going to do. Just basic key values. Once we got that set up, now we have to set up our inventory file. So our inventory file here is this YAML file here. Let's get rid of that. So YAML, and this is why you need to do something like use VS Code or something like PyCharm. I use VS Code, but you use PyCharm as well. Ansible is not really forgiving when it comes to format, right? If you don't format this stuff right, it will bomb out on you and give you a nasty error. And then the worst part about it is the errors are not very clear about what's the problem, right? It'll just give you an up caret and say, hey, the problem's over here, but I don't really know what that problem is. So you have to be very careful. That's why if you use something like VS Code or PyCharm, they kind of, once you say, okay, this file is a certain type, it kind of puts everything in the order it needs to be. So always use, like I said, I use VS Code because it'll color code stuff too as well. So when you do a YAML file, you always start with these 3 dashes, right? This will say, hey, this is a YAML file. Then there's 2 ways to do this. There's an INI format, and then there's the YAML format. Now, the INI format is, I heard it's going to be deprecated, so you might as well just start with this. So it's all hierarchical. So we have routers, host. So this, what I'm saying is I have let's say a value for routers, and within routers, I have all this stuff. So I got something called host, and I have R1, so router 1. Now, as you can see, everything has a colon to it. And you see this indentation, that's the hierarchy. So routers, then the child of routers would be host, and then the child of hosts would be R1, okay? And then there's a key value here called Ansible host. This is just saying what the user, the IP address of the host that I'm trying to get to. Now, I have another key called all, and then I have children, and then I have routers. So what this is saying is there's an all variable that in the children of the all variable is routers. So when you see the actual Ansible playbook, you will see where I say, hey, this is going to go to all. That means everything that's in all for routers, basically, is going to, this is what I'm going to send the commands to. Right now, it's only R1. If I wanted to create R2, I would come back here, for instance, go back and say R2, colon, and it already formatted where it needs to be, Ansible host, and then whatever the IP address is, okay? Right, and then it will hit 2 routers. Back here. Yes, I already know that's boss. So now this vars is under all. So again, all, and the variables for all, right? Now, if I wanted to do routers, it would be routers var, right? It'd be under, the var would be under routers, okay? But since this is going to affect every router that I'm going to talk to, I'm just going to put it under all and vars, right? So when I call all, it's also going to look at the variables for all. Ansible user, this is the username and password that's on the router itself. So you still have to set up at least username and password, SSH keys, and SSH access to the router. Cisco, password Cisco, this is a lab, so I really don't care. The Ansible Network OS is, I'm telling this is an iOS router. Now you have iOS XR, you have iOS XE, but I'm just saying iOS, right? The Ansible connection is network CLI. Become is yes. Become method is enable. So what does this mean? These three lines here, Ansible become means the enable. So you're hitting enable or en on the actual command line. The method is the enable. Again, enabled. And then this, right? Become able password. This is like if you go into the Cisco router and you say enable secret and then the password. That's basically what this is. So I just made the enable password Cisco, right? Now you don't have to use enable secret. You can use enable password Cisco, but that's basically what I'm saying. So once I have that all set up, now I can actually run I can create a playbook that actually runs commands. Because what's it going to do is when I say all, it will go to this router here. It's going to log in with these credentials, and then it's going to do the command I needed to do. That's the inventory file. Now, the more devices you have, the more you have to fill out the host, right? Whether I can do, routers, and then I can have another switch host and then switches and all that good stuff, right? But since I don't have any switches that I have in here, I just have router 1 to demonstrate. Again, master something simple, then start mastering something hard, and then optimize, right? I said in the last video, mastery comes before optimization. This is another issue that I find in a lot of this network automation AI world. They were so in a rush to get the AI and automate, but if you don't have the basic fundamentals down, if you don't even know what's going on behind the scenes, how can you use AI to automate it, or how can you optimize it? That's another question that I pose to the AI and automation community. So now that's all set up. Now let's look at an actual Ansible playbook. Simple Ansible playbook. Show IP interface brief command. So again, like I said before, we're going to start off saying this is a YAML file. So you have to do the 3 dashes to say, hey, this is a YAML file. Then we're going to give it a name. The name has to start with a dash because if not, this will error out, right? The name is saying, what is this command supposed to do? Now, you will see this when you run the playbook. You will see the name of all the things that you were doing, right? So this is simply saying, show IP interface brief. That's the command I'm going to be running, right? What host am I trying to hit? Now, I can say R1 in this, or I can use all. The reason why I use all because I only have one thing in there and all has all the variables to it, right? To log in. If I did R1, I would have to have a var under the router hierarchy so that it knew how to log in. But I just do all because it's just one router in there. Now, task. This is what I'm actually going to do. A task is basically, what are you going to do in this Ansible playbook? And everything falls under task, okay? You can't have tasks and run a couple things. Technically you could, but let's say just for simplicity's sake, we'll say we're going to have a task, basically telling Ansible this is what you're going to do. And then we're going to say then we're going to start naming it. So we name the task gathering facts. This technically shouldn't be gathering facts. The task I'm going to do is showing the interfaces on the router. That's what we're going to do. Showing the interfaces on the router. Now, once we do that, we're going to use this module here called Cisco iOS underscore command colon. This is where we're relating this to just Cisco iOS, right? This is a module strictly for Cisco iOS. Now, under that, you have to do the indentation again. You're going to say another keyword of commands. This is saying these are the commands that you're going to run with this module, cisco.ios.ios underscore command. Very simple, right? And then we're going to register it. Now, what's register mean? Register means I'm going to save the output in a variable called show IP. And this is where, like I said before, you need to know what variables are, string variables, lists, dictionaries, you need to know those fundamental things, right? Because you got to know this register command is going to register this output into show IP as the variable. And then the next task, after I do the show IP brief, the next task or the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to display what I found. So what I'm going to do, instead of saying display facts, I'm going to say display interface output, right? And this, you coding, best practices is always say what it is, be clear on what it is, right? I said displaying facts, but if you're a network engineer and you don't know what facts are, you're gonna say, well, I don't know what facts are, so what am I doing, right? So this is all I'm doing is display interface output. I'm using the debug module for this, and then the message I'm going to display is show IP, and you have to do it in quotations with these curly brackets on each side with the space in between the variable that you're trying to send. That's it. Simple. Now, when we try to run this, now hopefully when I run this file here, let me double click this here. Now, hopefully I can run this. Oh, gotta save it. Let's save. I'll just open up the terminal here. Now, when you want to run a playbook, you go Ansible, since I'm already in the folder. So if I do pwd print working directory, this is where you need to learn Linux as well. You need a little simple stuff. I go Ansible, playbook, right? Now this is what playbook I want to run. So I do show ipbrief.yaml. Now what's going to happen is it will, depending on how I set this up, because I did have to set the environment up. Let's just run it. Boom. So this ran. Let me see if I can move this up here. So this is what happened. The playbook show IP interface brief. See that name? The show IP interface brief. That's what I'm playing. Task, show the interface on the router. There we go. So here's showing the interfaces on the router. It uses the Cisco iOS command module or underscore command module. Ran this command and put it in a variable called show IP, and then display the interface output. And this is the message. And this is what it looks like ultimately at the end. Now it did the command, all this good stuff here, and then it did this ST out or standard output line. And this is what you're really focusing on. This jumble up stuff here, don't really pay attention to that. It ultimately is the ST out, which is standard output in line format. And this is what it looks like. Very simple. Okay. And then at the end, it's going to say, I'm going to give you a recap. R1, okay, that means I ran it twice and everything was good to go. We're good there. All right. That's really what that looks like, right? From an Ansible standpoint. I'll give you another example here. I'll give you one for pushing configs. Or let me see. Do I have one for loopback? Let me see if I have one for loopback. No, that's gathering facts, show IP route, push configs. All right. So this is a little bit more advanced. Well, I won't say advanced. I mean, it's pretty simple, but it's simple to me, but not to you if you're first looking at this. So don't take me saying it's pretty simple as it's pretty simple. Same thing, YAML file, we're naming it pushing configs. We're doing it to all routers, and then we are naming it pushing configs. Now this new module is called Cisco iOS underscore config. This is basically like you're going to the terminal and saying config terminal. That's basically what this module is. Now, what I'm doing is I could have used commands under here and then say, okay, push these commands. But what I did was I said, hey, I have a text file called router.txt, right? Router.txt is going to have the router configurations on there. And you know what? Let me pull over. I'm going to clear this out. And I'm going to pull up a terminal so you can see exactly what that file is. So let's move this over here. We're going to CD into desktop. I think Ansible files, configs, Ansible file configs. And this is where we're going to list it out. All right, so you see that router.txt file? That's basically what's going to have those configs. So you're probably saying, well, what's in router.txt? So what we're going to do is we're going to cat that file. Now, cat just means to show the file, or it also means concatenate, but you can actually use this to display something. So if we do that, all we're doing is we're going to create an interface 0. Now this has already been done already, so I'm not going to. I'll show you again, and I'll actually run the playbook, and then I'll show. It'll run the show command to show you it. So all it's going to do is create an interface called interface loopback 0. It's going to give it this IP address, and it's going to just turn it on. Okay. So now that you see exactly what the router txt file is, now it's going to register it. Remember, it's going to create a variable called push configs. I don't really need to do this. I just did that just to show you that, hey, I can push this and then put it into a variable and then print the variable if I wanted to. Then I'm going to do this. I'm going to save the config by doing Cisco iOS command, which is kind of like Cisco iOS command. It's kind of like how I like to use it. It's kind of like show commands. You can use it for other things, but I like to do for show commands. And for this, iOS config is for my, configure terminal commands, things that's going to go into there. Next thing I'm gonna do is show loopback. So basically the command I'm gonna push out is show IP interface brief include loopback, and then I'm gonna store it in a variable called show loopback, and then I'm gonna print out show loopback. So I'm gonna use name print loopback. I'm gonna use the debug function or module, and then the message I'm gonna pick is show loopback. So let's run this. We're gonna clear this out here, and then we're gonna do same Ansible playbook, but this time we're going to do push configs. Now, this may not do anything because it's already been done. Yeah. So, since I already had 3 loopbacks on here, yeah. So this is already there. All right. So what happened is I did the loopback. See, here's the loopback that I put in there. Now I only did loopback 0. And then here's loopback 0, and this is actually the configuration. So remember that configuration, 255.255.1 has been pushed. So that's actually on the router itself. Now, when I open up, if I were to look at EVE-NG for the router that I have in there, you would see loopback 0 in there. And this is verifying that it's in loopback, that's there. So if it wasn't there, you wouldn't see this. All right. And then we have one change, which was the loopback 1. So that's how it looks like in Ansible. Now, as you can see, Ansible hides a lot of stuff behind the scenes. There's a lot of Python stuff behind the scenes. That's why I said Ansible is like a wrapper for Python. If you're learning this, the hardest part about Ansible is learning what modules to use and how to configure the module. Right? They have a whole bunch of stuff. They have Cisco iOS, iOS interface. I believe that's the module, and then you have to learn the key values that you need to put in there. Especially if you're going to use things like Jinja 2 templates, which is another way of templatizing your configurations. You're going to have to know, hey, how do I actually program these individual modules? So that's going to be the learning curve. But once you can master something like this simple stuff, if you can master, hey, how do I push a loopback? How do I get a show command? How do I take a file that has a bunch of configurations in there and push those configurations there? I like that method more than trying to configure these little individual modules, because I used to do the scripting with Notepad. And if you're a Notepad scripter, pushing the file is a lot easier than trying to memorize each individual key value. But it's also good to know the key values, because when you do Jinja 2 templating, you're going to have to use the module to do this, and then you're going to have to reference the template. That's a whole nother story. Let's keep it simple. Just learn how to do this stuff here and practice this. Start slow, take baby steps, and then Usain Bolt it when you start getting good at this. All right. So this is Ansible. That's simple Ansible stuff. Now I'm going to show you what Python looks like with the NetMiko, which is totally different. I kind of like that version. And then you can decide which path you want to go to, right? If you're just starting out, if it were me, um, I would say get good at Ansible because you can get real proficient in Ansible quickly. You can get really proficient in this. Python, if you just stick to the networking stuff, you can get proficient as well, as long as you get those and the Python fundamentals like the string values or the data types, basically variables, the strings, the list, the dictionary, how to work around with files and stuff like that. Once you get that down, then you can really start playing around with just Python. But start with this if you don't want to go directly to Python. So let's go to Python files. So here's Python files. Of course, this is more than likely not going to work. But what we're going to do here. All right. So this is show IP route pi. Now, I'm going to show you something in this because I have to run it through this IDE. Because if I just go to terminal and try to run this, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So Python 3, and then we're going to do show IP route.py. See that? Now NetMiko is installed on the device, on my laptop or on my Mac. It is installed. It's just I have Homebrew installed on here because I needed to install Ansible, and Ansible just was not installing correctly without Homebrew. So once I did that, NetMiko immediately stopped working. And then when I removed Homebrew completely, NetMiko started working, but then Ansible stopped working when I installed Ansible just normally. So this is like Homebrew. You need to make something where for NetMiko to translate this stuff so I can just install it in Homebrew, and then all this stuff will work. So let's explain this real quick. So this is Python, no wrapper. So let's go through this. Now this is only going to do, what did I pick? Let me just make sure I picked the right one here. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to change this here. This should be show IP route. So what I'm doing is I'm importing NetMiko from the NetMiko module, right? That's all that is. From NetMiko module, import NetMiko. From GetPass, import GetPass. GetPass is it's going to ask me to input the password. Now in this, since I do it with the this IDE, it's going to echo my password, which is Cisco. I don't really care if you guys know that because it's a lab. If you do this in normal VS Code, that's not this function, not on the Mac. If you do it in Linux, you won't run into this problem. But again, like I told you before, on Mac, there's a little hairy situation going on. So now we imported those two modules from these modules, or we imported these two functions from the modules. This router is a dictionary. So this dictionary is going to be called routers. In routers, you're going to have keys and values, right? Now, remember I just told you about when you learn dictionaries from anybody else, they give you these values that make no sense, has nothing to do with network engineering. This has something to do with network engineering. So the key is on the left-hand side. The value for that key is on the right-hand side. So I have a key called host, right? And that host key equals 192.168.1.52. So the IP address. Then the username is Cisco. Then the password is get pass. So basically the password is you need to type this in, right? Get pass with this parentheses for just, you need to type it in. Then device type is Cisco iOS. Now you need to, if it was a different device type, you need to put that device type in there. Now in the dictionary, every key and value is comma separated. So you have to have this comma here at the end of each of these. And then when you get to the end, you close it out with the curly bracket to the right. the dictionary starts with a curly bracket to the left, ends with a curly bracket to the right. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use net connect, and we're going to use net Miko, and we're going to log into router. That's what this command means. Hey, net connect, net Miko to this router that I have here. Now, we're going to have a command value, commands called show IP interface. That should be show IP route. And again, this is where you need to know the syntax, because I could have showed you that, try to run it, and it would have failed because that command isn't right in Cisco syntax. So this is going to be commands equal show IP route. So that's all this is, a string value, right? Strings are either going to be double quotations or single checked. Now you got to be careful, because if you're going to type something in like a sentence that has am or I and M, and you use the single quotes at the to do your string value, it will bark at you. So now you have to use a double quote, and so you can use and. And that's what you got to do. When you play around with this, you'll start learning that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to do net connect send commands command. So what we're going to do is we're going to send this command of commands of this variable to the router. Then we're going to print out the output of this statement, and then we're going to disconnect. Now, technically, I could have disconnected from the router and then printed that out, but actually, we'll do this. We'll do this live and see what we're going to. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another variable called output, and output equals that. We're going to copy this. We're going to disconnect from the router, and then we're going to print out the variable output. So it makes a little bit more sense. So what we're going to do here is we're going to, let me save this. I don't like this save all function, but whatever. And let me see if it did something to this. Yeah, see the prime here is, oh no, let me see. All right, there we go. So, and this is the difference between PyCharm and VS Code. When I click on this, it just goes directly. With PyCharm, I got to double click. So what we're going to do is we're going to have, now we have another variable called output, which is going to be the output of this command being sent. We're going to disconnect from the router using netconnect.disconnect, and then we're going to print the output of this command. Basically, we're going to print this variable out at the end. Now, as you can see, everything that pushes to the NetMiko starts with netconnect. So netconnect send command, netconnect send config set, and that's going to be in another example I'm going to show you. And then net connect disconnect. So long as you know it starts with net underscore connect, you can kind of figure out what you're trying to do. But I'm only showing you like some certain things. Now, this net underscore connect send commands is kind of like, again, the show command. So related back to Ansible, where we use Cisco iOS underscore commands, and I like to use those for show commands. This send connect or net connect or net underscore connect send commands is kind of like for show commands. If I want to actually push commands, it would be net underscore connect send config underscore set, and then whatever I'm going to push. And I'll show you that in a different example. So now if I go to run this, let's just make sure we're going to run this. First one, show IP route. Now you're going to see it's going to echo my stuff. So boom, this is normal because it's just this IDE. Now I'm going to type in Cisco because that's the password. Boom. So what that did, let's scroll up here. Now, as you can see, the Python method, the output is a lot cleaner than the Ansible method. Remember in Ansible, you had that, it's like, looked like chicken scratch and just garbage. And then you looked at the standard output line command, and that gave you the output. With NetMiko and Python, it gives you the same look as if you were at the actual router itself. And that's why I kind of like the Python method a little better, because it's a lot, when the finished product is a lot more readable than Ansible's finished product. I like both of them, but if I'm going to strictly talk about output, Python output is a lot better. And as you can see, it ran the show IP route command. Like I said, this is the output. It ran the show IP route command. Here's what you would look like on a normal router. And then it disconnected, and then it printed the output at the end. Okay. So that's very simple Python. The difference here is, though, you need to now know how to do dictionaries, right? And we're in Ansible, you didn't really even know how to do that. It's a wrapper for this, for Python. So again, if you don't want to learn like the Python syntax and stuff like that, then I would push you towards Ansible. If you don't mind having to do a little bit more tweaking, a little bit more work, and learn what a dictionary and a list and all that good stuff is, then I would probably push you or Python. And I'm gonna tell you my personal experience. I started out with Ansible and just stuff off the top of my head, stuff that I used to do. Now, again, I'm not a network automation expert. I'm just doing things that I used to remember off the top of my head. I'm probably going to get back into where I used to be, which is I just do automation all the time. But once I got into Python and I start when I was able to relate it to being a network engineer, then I preferred this method because this was a lot more easier and the output is a lot better, right? And then you could do for loops and stuff like that. For loops to, if I had more than one router, I could do a for devices in parentheses, router one, router two, router three, and then I would run this command on each of those, and then I would have an output, right? So I'm not going to get into for loops in here. But again, if you want to do the Python method, you need to know what those fundamental things are. I'm going to keep stressing that. You can't skip the fundamentals. If you try to skip the fundamentals and jump straight into this, because I know a lot of videos say, oh, you want to learn how to do network automation, just get into network automation. Absolutely not. Learn the basic Python fundamentals and then get into it. So show IP brief, same thing. If I click on this, it's going to be doing the same import, same stuff here. Now, here's where, from a coding standpoint, you start naming what you're going to do. So I'm connecting to the router and the dictionary, same command, connect equals netmiko router, which is connecting to this. I'm going to run this show IP interface brief command. I'm going to map that command to a variable called output. I'm going to disconnect, and then I'm going to print out the output. Same thing that I just did in the show IP route, right? But this time, instead of just doing this and you like, I have no idea what you just did, I see a bunch of code. Here, I'm actually putting comments to tell you each and everything that I'm doing. And that's another thing that I see in a lot of courses, they just do this, no explanation, which is, if you're a beginner, you're confused. This is what needs to be done in every Python course. Every network automation course needs to have this. Because once I do this, it makes a lot more sense for if I was to pass this to someone else, they can look and see exactly what the heck I'm doing. So let's run this here. Interface brief. That's going to pop up like normal. And there you go. So if we look at this, it logged into the router. It ran this command. It stored the output of that command in a variable called output. I disconnected from the router with the net connect disconnect, and then I just printed the output. And as you can see, this is the same clean output that you would see if you were directly sitting at the console. And again, if I wanted to do a for loop and go through a bunch of routers, I can do that. Now, what's one thing that you see that's different from Ansible? There's no inventory file. I didn't have to worry about creating an inventory file in YAML. I just did it directly in here. Now, again, for small environments, this is fine, but there's other ways to do this. Now, let's look at configure loopback. Now, this is a little different. Let's get rid of this. Because not only does this use a dictionary, it also uses a list. And remember when I told you about lists and it had apple, oranges, and grapes? Nobody cares about apple, oranges, and grapes. You need to relate it to how network engineers and what they do for their job. So here we is. We're still doing the import from NetMiko. We're importing NetMiko from NetMiko or the function. We're getting get pass. We have the router here. All right, same dictionary, same stuff that I just showed you in the other ones. Now, again, I didn't do the comments in this because I was just typing this out. So we connected to the router. We created a variable called commands. Now, this is a list. Now, a list has brackets. Still same function as the dictionary, but the dictionary, let me not say it's the same function as the dictionary. A list, you can change a list. Obviously, you can change dictionaries and stuff, but they start out with different brackets, right? So this is the curly brackets are dictionary, list are the straight brackets. And what this is going to do is it's going to run this command, interface loopback 2, IP address, give it an IP address, and no shut. Now, this is without doing it from a file, okay? Then you're going to use this command, and I've said this command before, right? Or here's the other variable of show run interface loopback 2. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to use netconnect send underscore config underscore set command. So this is going to configure terminal and then going interface loopback 2, IP address this, no shut. That's basically what I'm doing. But I'm using the list to do this. Then I'm going to do netconnect send command output. So then I'm going to send this command show run interface loopback 2. I'm going to print. I'm going to move this because this is a little better. I'm going to disconnect from the router. And then I'm going to print the output of this. Now, the reason why this says netconnect send commands output is because I never created an output. I never created a variable for this command. If I wanted to, I can go verify equals that. And instead of having this long output here, I'll just print verify. All right. So to review, we're going to log into the router. All this is logging, all this stuff here, logging into the router. Commands in a list form is we're just going to run these commands. All right. Interface loopback 2, you see it's the single quotes there, space, another command, space, another command, all in single quotes, right? And then you close out the bracket. Then we're going to have this output equals show run loopback 2. We're going to send these commands here, space this out a little bit. We're going to send this command using configure terminal or this config set, this net connect send config set command is just configure terminal and then send all this or type all this. Again, configure terminal, interface loopback 2, IP address 10.10.10.10, 255, 255, 255, no shut. Again, you need to know Cisco syntax before you can do all this. Then we're going to have a variable called verify. That's going to be the output of show run interface loopback 2. So this is like you're sitting at the enable prompt and you're just a show run interface loopback 2. It's going to disconnect from the router and then it's going to print the output of show interface loopback 2. Show run interface loopback 2. So let's get to this to do configure loopback. And now we're going to run it. In the wrong thing. Boom. So I pushed those commands. As you can see, I pushed it here with this net connect send configure send underscore configure underscore set commands. Then I have the verify the verify variable that's going to print out the output or print out the results of sending the show run interface loopback 2. and then I disconnect it from the router and I print my variable out. And as you can see, show run interface loopback 2 would show me exactly what was done. And that's what you would use lists and dictionaries in Python for network automation. You can use lists and dictionaries and all that other stuff for other things if you want to be a Python programmer. But when we're talking about directly on network engineering and network programmability and network automation, this is what you're going to use it for. Now, this is a simple video. If you really want to learn this, start taking some Python classes, some Ansible classes, but just beware of the person that's teaching you. And then you can get to this. And this is simple stuff, right? I'm not showing you a whole bunch of other craziness. I'm just showing you simple stuff. Next one I'm going to show you, and this is the last one I'm going to show you, is doing this from a file. So we're going to open up configure loopback from a file. So same setup. From NetMiko, import NetMiko from getPass, here's the dictionary. We're going to connect to the router. As you can see in the comment, we're going to connect to the router. We're going to say a CFG file or config file variable. You can name this variable however you want. It's called loopback3.txt. So let me stop right here. The reason this loopback3.txt, open up this, and we're going to go here, and we're going to cd desktop Python files, and ls, and then I'm going to cat loopback3.txt. That's all that is. Let me stretch this out so you can see it because it's fairly small. So all that is interface loopback3 IP address no shut. Same thing I could have did in the list, but now I'm doing it in a file. Now, the one thing I wanted to tell you is I didn't do this thing called import OS because the file is in the same directory as the Python script. If it was in a different directory, I would have to do something called import OS, right? And then I would have to do OS change directory. And then I would have to tell it where it is, right? So I say it was, in a different directory, I would have to do home, let's say desktop, if I could spell here, desktop, some directory, configs, if that was real. But since it's in the actual directory of the Python script, I don't need to do this. So we just need to take that out. And OS is how you manipulate, how you can read files. So you can import files, read files, manipulate files, stuff like that. But since we're not doing any of that, we're just pulling those commands from the file that's in the same folder as the Python script. So I don't need to actually tell it where to go. So the variable is going to be change files. Then we're going to use that same netconnect command, but it's going to be from file instead of config set. We're going to do netconnect send configs from file. So netconnect dot send underscore config underscore from underscore file and the variable CFG file. Then we're going to do verify equals show run interface loopback 3. Then we're going to have an output. We're gonna have an output that's mapping to this command. So net connect send underscore command verify. So I'm just sending the variable verify, which is technically show run interface loopback 3. Disconnect from the router, print the output. That's all I'm doing. So now we're gonna go from file. Now remember, I'm pushing configs from a file now. So again, if you're used to just notepad scripting it up, it's better to just do that way, right? Instead of trying to use a list and unnecessary, all right? But master that way first before you go from a file, because if you can't push it from a list, trying to do it from a file is kind of irrelevant. So we're going to play. We're going to log in here. Should run through all the stuff. After everything is done, we get our output of show interface loopback 3, 11.9, 255, 255, 255, 255. So that's just to verify that those commands from the file actually took. All right. And that's the difference between automation with Ansible and automation with Python. Again, you could choose either or. What's the easiest one though? I would say, in my humble opinion, once you learn Python fundamentals, which is the data types and stuff like that, I would say Python is a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier because you don't need to know every key in a module. Now, Ansible is great, right? Ansible is great. And I started off with Ansible, right? Because I just needed to know, hey, I need to get proficient in network automation very quickly. Ansible is where you need to go. If you want to get down into the weeds and actually understand what Ansible is doing behind the scene, Python is where you want to go. So it's really about time. How much time do you have to actually learn at least the basics of Python to get you to this level and then start really getting into it? Or do you need to like, hey, I need to be able to do some automation real quick and I don't have time to be learning with, dictionaries and lists and all that. I just need to get something up and running. Well, then Ansible is the way to go. Because again, you can see in Ansible, if I switch it back to Ansible, if you see in Ansible, all you need to know, hey, what are the modules that I can pull, and then how do I configure the key values? But you also have the headache of now I need to have an Ansible CFG file, I need to have an inventory file, I need to have all that. With Python, you don't need any of that. You just need to know, hey, what modules do I need to import? How do I create a dictionary? What are the netmiko commands that I need to send to the router? Now, there's other stuff. There's Norin, there's Napalm. I'm just showing you netmiko. Either or, they're great network automation frameworks. I would say, learn Ansible. Learn Ansible to get you up and running real quick. Learn Python to get you more proficient in what Ansible is probably doing behind the scenes. And if you want a cleaner output. So this is Don from Padlock Technologies. I hope this video was informative. I wish I had this video when I was learning this, because seeing this and related it to network engineering makes a whole lot of sense. And I hope it makes more sense to you. Hopefully this video was informative. Don't forget to share, comment, like, and subscribe. Thank you, and have a nice day.